My only son stood there, mute as a stone, while his new wife treated me like a dirty prop that needed to be hidden away, all because my dress didn't fit her vision. The estate smelled like money and lilies, that heavy, suffocating scent that always reminds me of funerals, not weddings. I was standing on the edge of the terrace, my feet already throbbing against the cold stone. I was wearing deep plum silk. It was the last thing my husband bought me before he passed, a piece of our history that I wanted to wear for our son's new beginning. But as the photographer started lining up the wedding party, Evelyn glided over. Her lace gown hissed against the floorboards like a warning. She didn't make a scene. She didn't frown. She was terrifyingly calm. She reached out with those perfect, manicured fingers and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear. Her hand was as cold as ice. "Eleanor, sweetie," she whispered, her voice a low, smooth hum. "That plum, it's really clashing with the aesthetic. It's going to look like a bruise in the photos. The pastel theme is ruined the second you step in the frame. Why don't you go sit in the back row? Under the oaks? The shadows will hide the color. And the pictures will stay consistent." I looked at Marcus, my son. He shifted his weight, staring intently at the tips of his polished shoes, refusing to meet my eyes. The silence coming from him hit me harder than anything she said. In that moment, the sun felt like it just switched off. I wasn't a mother, or a guest of honor. I was a production error she was trying to edit out. I realized then, I spent 30 years building a home for that boy. And they were already busy measuring the curtains for my exit. I'm sharing this story to show just how much respect we've lost in the eyes of the younger generation. If this has ever happened to you, stay with me. My champagne was dead flat, kind of like the look in Marcus's eyes when he finally glanced my way. The condensation on the glass felt like ice, a sharp contrast to the sticky afternoon heat. The high society crowd swarmed around the lawn, their laughter sounding jagged and loud over the generic classical music playing in the background. I stood exactly where Evelyn put me, back in the cheap seats, where the shade of the old oak tree cut right across my dress. And that dress, it wasn't just silk. I could still feel Arthur's rough thumb brushing against the fabric 20 years ago. He promised me we'd watch our boy become a man while I wore this color. It smelled like cedar and lavender, the scent of my history in this house. But standing there under my daughter-in-law's critical stare, I didn't feel cherished. I felt like a dusty museum exhibit that someone forgot to put in storage. I watched Evelyn during the ceremony. She didn't look like a bride. She looked like a general surveying conquered territory. She moved with this rigid, calculated grace. When she said her vows, her voice was pretty, sure, but empty. She didn't look at Marcus with that messy, terrifying vulnerability you see in people who are actually in love. She looked at him like he was the final piece of a very expensive puzzle she'd just finished solving. By the time the sun started to drop, the packing order was clear. I wasn't the matriarch anymore, I was just the clash in the photo. I watched Marcus lean in to whisper something to her, and she patted his cheek with this little, condescending smile. It was the same smile she'd given me. That's when it hit me. A memory I'd shoved down 6 months ago floated right back up. When they asked to move into the estate, I caught Evelyn staring at the antique mahogany desk in the study, the one where we keep the deed and the land grants. At the time, I told myself she was admiring the woodwork. But looking at her now, I knew better. She hadn't been admiring the craftsmanship, she was counting the square footage of her new kingdom. My son saw a woman who loved his home. I was starting to realize I wasn't smelling rain in the air, I was smelling a hustle. The reception moved into the grand hall, a room I've spent 30 years polishing. But you couldn't smell the floor wax anymore. The whole place reeked of those expensive, imported lilies. It was suffocating. The room looked different to me now. The chandeliers didn't look elegant, they looked sharp, hanging there like jagged teeth. That's when I realized my son hadn't just brought home a wife, he'd opened the door to a demolition crew. I hid in a small alcove behind a heavy velvet curtain. I didn't cry, I just gripped the small silver key in my clutch. It felt cold and grounding. It was the key to a safety deposit box that held a lot more than jewelry, It held the proof of who actually owned the floorboards Evelyn was dancing on. I watched her through the gap in the drapes, spinning in that white dress, convinced she'd already won the lottery. It was quiet in the alcove, the only honest corner left in a house full of fakes. The music switched to something loud, a bass beat that rattled the floor. I saw Marcus laughing with Evelyn's father, a guy whose smile always reminded me of a used car salesman. They were huddled close. I leaned in. The transition needs to be seamless, her father said, his voice cutting through the noise. Once the papers are signed tomorrow morning, we start the gutting. This place has potential, but it's too dated, too burdened. My son didn't flinch. He didn't defend the 30 years of history in these walls. He just nodded, nursing his bourbon. Evelyn has a vision. Sir, I just want her to be happy. It wasn't a knife in the back, it was a slow freeze. He knew I wanted to live out my days in the East Wing. He knew the garden was my life. And there he stood, agreeing to scrap me before they'd even cut the cake. The boy I raised was gone. This man just saw me as a piece of old furniture that didn't match the new rug. I backed away from the curtain. I didn't say goodbye. I took the servant's stairs up to my room. It smelled like home up here, cedar and lavender. I moved fast. I didn't pack clothes. I just took the essentials, Arthur's letters, my passport, and the original, unexecuted deed to the estate. Then I saw it on my vanity. A cream-colored envelope, a pre-printed, thank you, card, already signed by Evelyn. Inside was a note. Eleanor, we've booked a lovely suite at the Gables Senior Living for you starting Monday. Best to get you away from the renovation noise. Don't worry about the furniture, we'll handle the disposal of what doesn't fit the aesthetic. Disposal. The word sat there on the page, vibrating. She hadn't even waited for the sun to rise on her first day as a wife to evict me. I walked to the window. The party was still raging below. I looked out at the rolling hills, the lake where Marcus caught his first fish, the roses Arthur planted. They thought they were inheriting a kingdom. They didn't realize they were standing on a rug I was about to yank out from under them. I checked my watch. 1:15 a.m. I took a piece of stationery and wrote 3 words. No explanation, no anger, just a fact. I left it on the bed, tucked the silver key into my pocket, and walked out the back door. The rain soaked my silk dress instantly, making it heavy and cold. I didn't look back. I got into my old sedan, and the engine turned over with a reassuring growl. I drove toward the city lights. The question wasn't whether they'd notice I was gone. The question was, what would happen tomorrow morning when they tried to sign those property papers and realized they were worth about as much as confetti? The windshield wipers were slapping back and forth, thwack thwack, sounding exactly like Arthur's heart near the end. Inside the car, it was a relief. Just the smell of old leather and peppermint. No more suffocating lilies. As the city skyline came into view, I realized something. For 30 years, I kept the fire burning in that house. Tonight, I was the one dousing it. I looked at the briefcase on the passenger seat. That wasn't just paperwork, that was the detonator. I checked into a quiet hotel near the harbor, generic, clean, the kind of place Marcus wouldn't be caught dead in. I sat by the window, watching the gray Atlantic chop. I thought about those property papers Evelyn was so thirsty for. She assumed marrying the heir meant she got the keys to the castle. She forgot about the guardian clause. Arthur wasn't a fool. He knew houses are only as solid as the people living in them. He'd seen his own father lose everything to a grifter with a nice smile. So, we wrote a clause into the family trust. The estate cannot be altered or sold as long as the matriarch occupies the East Wing. By trying to ship me off to a nursing home, they didn't just break my heart, they broke the contract. By 6 a.m., the sun was coming up, pale and sick-looking. Back at the estate, I knew the panic was starting. I could picture Evelyn clicking around on the hardwood, clutching that thank you card, sipping espresso that was about to taste like ash. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. Marcus. Then a text from Evelyn. Eleanor. We're in your room. Where are you? The lawyers are here. This isn't the time for games. I didn't reply. I just watched a seagull fighting the wind outside. My perspective shifted right then. I stopped seeing them as family to protect. I saw them as what they really were, the opposing counsel. It was chilling, but it felt good. I'd spent my life patting the sharp corners of the world for Marcus, and all I did was raise a man who couldn't stand up without stepping on me. I opened the briefcase and pulled out the real deed. The paper was thick, yellowed, smelled like dust. It requires a living matriarch's physical signature for any construction or sale. By checking into this hotel, I hadn't just disappeared, I dead-bolted the entire estate from 10 miles away. Without me in the room, their meeting was just a waste of expensive coffee. I stepped onto the balcony. The salt air stung, waking me up. I caught my reflection in the glass door. My dress was wrinkled, my hair was a disaster. But my eyes, they were clearer than they'd been in years. I wasn't waiting for the storm anymore. I was the storm. The phone started buzzing again, dancing across the table. I ignored it and took a sip of black coffee. I could see it all clearly, the lawyers checking their Rolexes, the catering staff cleaning up the mess, and Evelyn pacing the rug like a trapped animal. Then came the voicemail. I let it go to recording, then played it back. It wasn't Marcus, it was Evelyn, and her flute voice was gone. She sounded jagged. Eleanor, I don't know what kind of stunt this is, but the trustees are saying the signature we had you sign on that medical consent form last month doesn't cover the deed transfer. They're asking for the physical document. Marcus said it was in the desk. It's empty. Tell us where it is. Now. A nasty little smile crept onto my face. The medical consent form. I remembered that rainy Tuesday 3 weeks ago. Evelyn shoved a stack of papers in front of me, claiming it was just routine insurance updates. I saw her hand twitch then, a little crack in her perfect mask. But I signed it because Marcus was standing right there, and I was stupid enough to still trust him. It wasn't insurance. She hadn't just planned to move me, she tried to legally hijack me. She wanted to strip my rights while I was still breathing so she could toss me in the disposal bin without a fight. I put the phone down. The balance of power didn't just shift, it flipped. Back at the estate, they were realizing that the floor they thought they were standing on was actually a trapdoor. I looked at the deed on the bed. Behind all the legal jargon, there was a codicil I added years ago, a page Marcus was too lazy to read. It was simple. In the event of an attempted relocation of the primary resident without documented medical necessity, the family trust automatically triggers a liquidation for charity clause. Basically, if they try to kick me out, the house gets sold, the money goes to the children's hospital, and they don't get a dime. I stood up and smoothed out my dress. It felt like armor now. I picked up the hotel landline and called the one person who could finish this, Arthur's old legal partner. A man who hated Evelyn's father as much as I did. It's Eleanor, I said when he answered. They pulled the trigger. Execute the audit. As I hung up, my cell buzzed one last time. A picture message from Marcus. No text. Just a photo of the note I left on the bed. My handwriting, sharp and clear. Check the basement. Why the basement? There's no money down there. No secret will. But as I stared out at the gray Atlantic, I wondered if Marcus remembered what we buried under the foundation stones 10 years ago. Or was he too busy trying to paint over the past to realize that some things, once you dig them up, can never be put back? I sat on the edge of the bed, picking at the cheap polyester spread. The ocean was loud outside, but in my head, the only thing I could hear was the heavy creak of that basement door back at the estate. I hadn't opened it in 30 years. I wasn't feeling sorry for myself anymore. I was sitting in a $200 a night hotel room, feeling like the guy holding the remote to the demolition charge. I knew exactly what was happening over there. That basement smells like wet dirt and old furnace smoke. I pictured Marcus leading the way, sweating through his dress shirt. I pictured Evelyn trying to navigate those uneven stone steps in her expensive heels, realizing for the first time that this house wasn't just a pretty showroom, it was a fortress with secrets. They weren't looking for memories. They were scavenging for a loophole to get out of the financial trap I just snapped shut. But when they got to the back corner, behind that loose brick in the foundation, they wouldn't find property papers. They'd find a heavy, lead-lined box. Then my phone rang. It was Marcus. The arrogance from this morning was gone. He sounded hollow, shaking, like a kid who just realized he broke something he can't fix. "Mom, what is this? We found the box. There's a ledger in here. And blueprints from the 90s. He didn't realize he was holding a live grenade. "Those blueprints aren't ours, Marcus," I said, keeping my voice dead even. "Those documents belonged to Evelyn's father. That ledger was a 30-year-old record of every bribe, every cut corner, and every safety violation his firm committed to build the luxury high-rises that gave Evelyn her trust fund. Arthur didn't keep those papers for blackmail. He kept them as shark repellent, insurance to make sure the crooks who built this city knew to stay the hell away from our family." In his desperation to give his wife what she wanted, Marcus had just dug up the one thing that could send her daddy to federal prison. He thought he was saving her vision. Instead, he just handed her the evidence of her own family's corruption. I leaned back against the headboard, listening to the static. My coffee was cold and bitter, kind of like the reality sinking in over at the estate. Evelyn's voice cut through the background. A sharp, panicked hiss. "Shut it, Marcus. Put it back. If anyone sees this, my father goes to federal prison. The firm collapses. Everything we have is gone." The picture snapped into focus. This wasn't a mother-in-law dispute about curtain colors anymore. It was about a house built on quicksand. By trying to dispose of me, they tripped the wire on their own bomb. If I wasn't there to sign the silence agreement as the head of the trust. Arthur's will is clear. That ledger goes to the district attorney within 24 hours. I walked to the window. The light over the harbor was a bruised purple, same color as this damn dress. I didn't feel like a victim anymore. I felt like a judge waiting to drop the gavel. "Evelyn's right about one thing, Marcus," I said, my voice stripping away the warmth he was used to. "The decor doesn't matter when the walls are made of stolen glass. You have until sundown to decide if you're her husband or my son. Because tomorrow, the lawyers won't be asking about the property papers. They'll be asking about the bribes." I hung up. The silence in the hotel room was heavy. I watched the clock tick. It felt less like passing time and more like a countdown. My phone stayed dark for exactly 42 minutes. Then it lit up. Not Marcus. George, Evelyn's father. The text was a masterclass in sweating bullets. "Eleanor, let's be civil. Marcus is a mess. Evelyn is young. We are family. That ledger belongs in a private archive, not a courtroom. Name your price for the signature. Anything." I didn't blink. I didn't even reply. Then came the pocket dial. Marcus must have fumbled his phone trying to call me. Through the speaker, I heard Evelyn. She wasn't desperate anymore, she was cold. Calculating. "Marcus, stop crying. If your mother doesn't show up, we tell the police she was disoriented. We use that medical consent form to show she wasn't in her right mind when she took those papers. It's her word against a certified firm. You want this house? You want the life I promised you? Then you stand by me. Not a crazy old woman trying to ruin us out of spite." That was the moment that killed whatever hope I had left. She wasn't just stealing the house, she was planning to paint me as senile to cover her tracks. "And my son?" I listened to the jagged silence on the other end. No defense. No, don't talk about my mother like that. Just the sound of his heavy breathing. He was actually weighing his mother's sanity against a marble foyer. I stood up. The plum silk dress felt like dead weight. The moral delay I'd granted them was over. I picked up the hotel landline and dialed the estate. George picked up on the third ring. "The audit has already started." "George," I said, my voice flat. "I sent digital copies of that ledger to Arthur's partner the second I walked out the door last night. My signature on the trust doesn't matter anymore. The mandatory disclosure clause just kicked in." Dead silence on the line. Then a hiss. "You'd destroy your son's inheritance for a grudge?" "I'm not destroying an inheritance," I replied. "I'm cleaning house. There's a difference." I hung up and went to the balcony. The sun was almost gone, leaving a blood-red line on the water. I looked at my hands. Steady. I wasn't angry anymore. I was just done. I was the force of nature they poked one too many times. Just as I turned to go inside, my phone pinged. A security alert from the estate. Silent alarm. The study. Someone was trying to crack the mahogany desk again, but they were entering the wrong code. Repeatedly. Who was it? George? Evelyn? Or was Marcus finally trying to find the one thing I hadn't told them about? Not the ledger in the basement. I wondered if he remembered the document hidden inside the frame of the wedding portrait they took this afternoon. The one document that makes the property papers, the ledger, and the trust entirely irrelevant. I sat back down in the dark. The clock ticked like footsteps. The real game hadn't even started yet. Day 2 started wet and gray. I stood on the hotel balcony, the morning mist soaking into my skin. Below, the city was waking up, tires humming on wet asphalt. The clanking of the harbor buoys. It sounded like a machine finally locking into gear. I touched the silver key in my pocket. It wasn't just a piece of metal anymore. It was the period at the end of a very long, very loud sentence. Back at the estate, I knew the smell of lilies had been replaced by the sweat of desperation. I could picture Marcus standing in front of that massive, gaudy wedding portrait Evelyn ordered. He wouldn't be admiring the gilded frame. He'd be tearing it apart, looking for a life raft, realizing his wife's family firm was a sinking ship. My phone buzzed. A bank notification. Alert. Large transfer initiated. Pending authorization. Evelyn. She was trying a Hail Mary. She tried to use that forged medical consent form to drain my personal accounts. It was the move of a cornered animal. My opinion of her dropped from dangerous to amateur. She didn't realize that the second I triggered the audit, every penny was frozen. She wasn't robbing me, she was just handing the forensic accountants more evidence. I went back inside and opened the last folder. The document hidden behind the wedding portrait wasn't a will, and it wasn't a ledger. It was the ground lease. Here is the truth Marcus never bothered to learn: we don't own the dirt. The estate sits on a historical preservation site. Arthur and I leased the land from the city 40 years ago for a nominal fee of $1 a year. But the lease has a restrictive covenant. It is non-transferable. It belongs to me, and me alone, contingent on my primary residence in the main house. By trying to ship me off to the Gables, Evelyn and Marcus didn't just break my heart, they voided the lease. The moment they legally claimed I had vacated the property, the land reverted to the city. The house, the garden, the marble foyer, it all belongs to the taxpayers now. Then the phone rang. It was Marcus. He was sobbing, that raw, ugly sound of a man who has lost his dignity. "Mom, please, the city council lawyers are here. They're giving us 48 hours to vacate. They say the house isn't ours anymore because you left." Evelyn is screaming at her father. "Everything is falling apart. You have to come back. Please, just come back and sign the residency affidavit." I sat in that cheap leather chair, listening to him cry. It felt weird. I felt bad for him. Sure, like you feel bad for a kid who touches a hot stove after you told him no. But I also felt the weight of that silver key in my hand. "Marcus," I said, my voice steady, "I didn't leave because of the decor. I left because the foundation was already gone. You picked a woman who wanted a throne. But you forgot one thing. You can't inherit a kingdom if you're just a squatter." I let that hang in the air. The room was bright now, harsh sunlight hitting the dust. It felt honest, cleaner than the lies back at the house. Marcus hadn't hung up. I could hear the chaos in the background, city officials shouting. Something glass shattering on the floor. "There's one thing you haven't checked. Marcus," I cut through his sobbing. "Inside the wedding portrait frame, behind the affidavit, there's a blue envelope. It's not for the lawyers. It's for you." Dead silence. Then I heard him running to the hall. The sound of wood cracking as he ripped the frame apart. This was the kill shot. That envelope didn't hold money. It held a DNA test from 25 years ago. Arthur knew. He always knew Marcus wasn't his biological son. It was a mistake I made early in our marriage. A brief thing with a man who vanished before I even started showing. Arthur chose to raise Marcus anyway. He gave him the name. He gave him the life. But he had a condition. Marcus had to prove he was worthy of the name. By siding with Evelyn. By trying to dispose of me to grab a title that wasn't his by blood. Marcus triggered the ultimate fail-safe. The trust isn't just revocable, it's contingent on a legitimate heir. Without Arthur's blood, and without my signature, Marcus is legally a stranger to that estate. Mom? Marcus's voice came back, sounding totally hollowed out. What is this? Who is this man? Why did Dad keep this? He kept it to see if the man you became would be better than the accident of your birth. I said, he wanted you to earn the house. Marcus, but you were so busy trying to paint it pastel. You forgot to check if you actually owned the walls. That was the tectonic shift. I heard Evelyn shriek in the background. She must have snatched the paper. She just realized she didn't marry a dynasty. She married a guy with zero legal claim to a single brick. Those property papers, she cried over? Confetti. I packed my bag. I left the plum dress on the bed and put on a travel suit I bought downstairs. I felt lighter. I left the silver key on the nightstand. I didn't need it. The city would change the locks by sunset. I got to the elevator. And my phone buzzed. A security alert. The camera feed showed Evelyn's father, George, throwing boxes into his trunk and peeling out of the driveway, leaving his daughter and Marcus standing there while the city crews taped off the gate. But there was someone else in the frame. A man in a dark suit I didn't recognize was standing by the rose bushes. He wasn't with the city. He was holding a folder that looked exactly like mine. Who the hell was he? Did Arthur leave a second guardian? Or was there another player in this game even I didn't know about? The elevator doors closed. The house was empty. The secrets were out. But as the numbers ticked down, a new question hit me. If Marcus wasn't the heir, and I was no longer the resident, then who has the city been talking to all these years? I stood on the deck of a little coastal cottage I bought 5 years ago, cash. Under my maiden name. Marcus never knew it existed. The air here was sharp, smelling of salt spray and pine needles. A cheap set of wind chimes sang in the breeze, a nice change from the silence I was used to. On the weathered table sat that blue envelope and a box of kitchen matches. I didn't need a courtroom to get my name back. I struck a match. The flame caught the corner of the DNA results instantly. I watched 25 years of secrets curl up, turn to black ash, and blow out toward the ocean. I wasn't just burning paper, I was burning my obligation to a man who picked a marble foyer over his own mother. Then, I signed the final handover papers for the Historical Society. The estate is a public park now. The walls that clashed with Evelyn's aesthetic belong to the taxpayers. Kids will be running through her perfect vision with muddy boots by next summer. Later that afternoon, I sat in a wicker chair with a cup of tea. I opened my laptop to check the local news. The headline was blunt: Historic Estate Reclaimed, Corruption Probe Launched. There was a grainy photo of the driveway. Evelyn and Marcus were standing by a pile of Louis Vuitton luggage that looked ridiculous next to the yellow police tape. Evelyn was screaming at a lawyer, looking like a total mess. Marcus was just sitting on a trunk, head in his hands. And that mystery man in the dark suit from the security feed? He wasn't a hitman. He was the city auditor. He'd been waiting for my signal for years. Seeing them now, I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel happy, either. I just felt light. The job was done. The lie was over. The sun broke through the clouds, hitting my new garden. The roses here are wild. They don't have to match a color palette. They just have to grow. Justice isn't always a gavel banging. Sometimes, it's just a quiet room after a lifetime of noise. If you were in my shoes, would you choose silence to keep a fake peace? Or would you speak up to protect justice and your own dignity?